Good afternoon, Whittlers of Reddit. I've received a lot of questions lately about the rings that I make. Some of you may recall seeing some of them of different shapes, different sizes. Most of what I make are children's sizes. It's easier to make because it's easier to source the wood. Um, I go out and find my wood out in the wild. I find a tree that has about the right diameter, a spruceling, a spruceling. I find a spruce. In fact, I'll show you. I find a piece about like this, and I cut it down. This actually, if you'll notice, there's a notch right here. This was going to be a walking stick, but due to the curvature, I couldn't make it a walking stick. It just didn't hold up, and also, I'm a bigger guy, and holding onto this thing, it just doesn't feel like it's going to hold me up. So, what I did is I cut off the end, because from this point down, and there's a little portion in here that's relatively straight, but from this portion down was extremely straight. And so what I did was I cut it off to make a ring blank, which is what this is. And I've prepped this ring blank to show you how I make rings. A lot of people on Reddit were asking me, how do I go about making a ring with a knife, and how do I go about making a ring in such a way that I don't split the wood? The truth is, honestly, I split the wood all the time. I tear up rings, and boy does it hurt inside. Because, you spend all this time working on something, and your project falls right out from underneath you. It's kind of devastating when it happens. Best thing to do, though, is when it breaks, keep going. Just because that piece of wood broke doesn't mean that this piece of wood won't break, or this piece of wood will break, or vice versa all the way down. Because the grain of the wood, from what I understand, because I'm certainly no wood expert, I'm very much an amateur, the grain of the wood and how the knots are placed in it and things like that can affect the strength of the wood. Also the type of wood. We all know about hardwoods and softwoods and things like that. So this is a piece of oak, if I'm not mistaken. It's a piece of scrub oak from off of the backside of the property. I cut it up, and I actually let this piece of wood season for about 3 or 4 months. I laid it down. It wasn't actually even my intention to season it. Like I said, it was supposed to be a walking stick, and so when I created it, it just sat there because I obviously don't do a whole lot of walking. But it is an incredibly good piece of wood for making rings. About 75% of the rings that I made came from this piece of wood in particular, that I still have. I give, every time I make a ring, I give it away. I try not to attach myself to it, because otherwise you end up like this. You just end up having ring after ring. There's some more over here somewhere. Oh, jeez. About to knock some stuff off over here. There's another ring in here somewhere. Give me just a second. Looking for the damn thing. Anyways, not gonna find it. I'm missing a ring somewhere. I hate that. I'll be looking for it forever. It probably fell off the little table right here and onto the ground and rolled away. But anyways, this is what you end up collecting. I ended up making about 75% of these rings from that piece of wood in particular. These rings are different sizes. Like I say, I have some here that's about a 7.5, possibly an 8 in ring. Again, I don't size them. I have family, and we are all different sizes, so like I just have, hey, put this on, because I need to know what size it is. Eventually, I'm going to buy a ring gauge, but again, I'm very frugal. I do this with an old-time whittler knife. Like, when you go to buy whittler knives, a lot of people will tell you don't buy an old-timer because it gets dull quick. They're not entirely wrong about that assessment. It does get dull quick. However, that's why you need a good sharpener. Always keep a good sharpener on hand. Make sure that you're constantly sharpening your blade. A dull blade is more likely to hurt you than a sharp one. I believe that's the old adage. So when I'm cutting these rings, this in particular is the knife that I use. And as you can tell, if it'll focus, come on, come on camera, is an old timer. And it is a whittler's knife. This specifically is not just like your grandpa's old timer that he stuck in his pocket. This is an old timer designed for whittling. It's got several different types of gouges. As you can see, there's a blade on that one that's kind of got like a 90-degree angle. I'm not quite sure what you would use that for, but eventually I'll figure it out. Because that's just how I've learned this whole process, is just trial and error, making mistakes and doing things my own way and trying to figure out what worked best for me and what might work best for someone else, maybe something totally different. This, it's got a standard flat chisel on there so you can knock off a little bit of wood. And it's got spoon knives. This is really the reason that I bought it, because I do want to get into eventually making spoons. Seems like something, I mean, it seems kind of lame. It's just a spoon, but the amount of craftsmanship that you can really put into those things and the amount of artisan and like artistry that you can put into it is truly amazing. It's one of the reasons that I actually came to this Reddit, is because I want to see what people have to offer and see if I can't learn something from you guys. And so that's the reason I'm actually making this video, is to share what I know, so that eventually you guys can learn what I know. And maybe at some point I can watch you guys and learn these little techniques that I don't exactly know right now. Ugh, spittle. My apologies. But it also has this tool in particular, if you can tell, has a slight curve on it. You can see it's got some wood in there too. It's got a slight curve on it. This is the tool that I use to make the rings. I mean, it's the workhorse. It makes the hole. It does a lot of the work and gets the ring made. And this particular blade, I haven't really had to sharpen it. I mean, to make a ring, again, I use about 90% of the actual cutting surface, and so I have to put about 10% power into it. I mean, I don't force it, I let it happen. Wood's a soft substance, and even when it's hard, it's still relatively soft by comparison of things like concrete and brick. So I use that on this. In order to prep myself for a ring, what you'll notice is that I've taken off this surface skin of bark. Like this is there was bark on top of this that I took off, and this is just like the little surface layer that's right below that. I'm sure it has a name. I don't know what it is. But as you can see, I sanded it down. I kind of got it looking smooth. But in particular on this one, and I don't know if the camera will be willing to cooperate to show it to you. Come on, camera. There's a little crack right here. This is not actually a real crack. That crack is simulated. If you ever see a crack, I think you can see it right there. If you ever see a crack like that in your ring, cut it off. You scrap it, because it's lost its structural integrity. It's going to fall apart. It's going to split. And when you cut into it, the only thing you're going to get out of it is heartbreak and pain and just frustration. So you prep it like this. And you always try to avoid you always use as little pressure as possible. You want to let your blades do 90% of the work. You just want to be putting enough pressure on it to control the direction of the blade and control where it's going. And 10% may be like an underestimate, because you always want to have enough control on your blade that you always want to have enough control on your blade so that when your blade is cutting something, it doesn't cut you. It cuts what you want it to cut. This is something that took me a long time to go, and as you can see, I still have not learned my lesson. I consistently have this problem. But once you have that, and I also have shown, I'm going to show you guys something else. This is, there's like some burring here, you see that? I don't know what you would call that. I think some people call it tearing, and a lot of times it comes from a dull knife. So like I say, sharp knives are important. If you're going to whittle, there's two things that you should always have. Knife, sharpener. My sharpener's inside the house. I'm not going after it. Like I say, if you take care of your knives, they'll take care of you, and you won't have to sharpen them that often. As long as you're making sure that you're putting the right pressure in the right place, allowing the blade to do the work. Okay, so let's say you get your piece of wood, and it's relatively straight. Oop, dropped it. It's relatively straight. You can see there's a slight bend in there. But that bend is actually okay. Because when you get down to sanding, this little bit of bump right here is going to go away. It's not even going to exist anymore. And as you can tell, we take off a lot of this skin on the outside. And when you're doing that, you can actually control how much is on the outside and the shape of it. Because you want to keep it as circular as possible. Because the more circular that it is, the less work that you're going to have to do later with sandpaper. And believe me, a lot of this work gets done with sandpaper. Very little ring. The ring is very little knife, mostly sandpaper. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the actual cutting process that I go through to make one of these rings. When I first started making them, I didn't have this. This was a convenience. Dropped a flower. This is what I made it with. This is one hell of a knife. This is a Gerber, and a lot of people don't like their knives, but this knife in particular got a lot of good reviews, especially as a bushcrafting knife, which in particular was something that I was interested in when I first started whittling, because bushcrafting, in a way, is a lot of the aspects of whittling. It's a lot of the things that make up whittling, because you're going to be doing fine work with an extremely large blade. And so when I actually started with this, I practiced making small things, smaller than a ring. This in particular, this flower, was made with this knife. And I mean, you can see that. I mean, big old thing. I made an even smaller flower. Look at there. A little tiny flower. And I used a toothpick at the time, and I even attempted to cut some leaves on there. Didn't quite work out on that one. But the flower's still pretty, so I kept it. I also made this one down here. The stem has fallen out of it. And so as you can see, I dyed it yellow using actually food coloring. Just experimenting, trying to make flowers, and I wanted to make them more interesting because every one that I had was just wood colored. And as great as wood is, don't get me wrong, we all like a little color in our lives, right? So, all right, let's get down to business here. Let's get down to brass tacks. What you came to see, what you wanted to know. This is the process by which I go about making one of these rings. I take the wood, as you can see, and I'm going to try and get this in camera. We take and we just cut off this very light pressure. You don't want a whole lot of pressure. Again, you're just taking off the top layer of wood here. You're just taking off that little bit of brown part. You want to get down to that white fresh wood down there. You want to see that. You want to be able to, oh, excuse me, that was rude. You want to be able to take this and you want to be able to see the grain of the wood and check for any knots that are under the surface, because a lot of times, like, I don't know if you can see it right there, there's a bit of a knot. That's a dark spot. That's just somewhere it's been on the ground. But there's a knot right there. And you can't tell that it's there, but as you can see, when I'm cutting it, it fights me. And look at there. You see that little knot right there? There's a little knot in there. And it's, see if we can get a better view of it. Anyway, there's a knot right there. And I couldn't see that knot until I pulled off that surface. And that's a lot of the reason that I do that, is so that I can see what's underneath and I know what I'm getting myself into before I jump in and end up screwing up a ring that was going to be messed up from the get-go, because I built it on a knot. It was built on a weak point, and when you build something on a weak point, it's destined to fail. So always pay attention to where the grain of your wood is and where the knots are, because these are important things when you're making something that's very small and very fine and very fragile. And especially when you're making it by hand. Machines are a little more forgiving, and though you wouldn't think necessarily that they're more forgiving, they tend to have more speed, more power, more accuracy than a human hand, and as a result, they can bypass a lot of the problems that a human hand will have. It's one of the downfalls of being a whittler, but it's a learning experience. It's one of the reasons that I love whittling. So basically, we take this off until we get about that much, about however long we want to make our ring. So we make our ring from this off the top. We're only going to be making it off of about that much off the top. I mean, that's literally it. We just have this as a handle to hold on to and to make more rings out of as we go down. So, if you can see in the end of that, I've already started a cut. I've sanded this down, and I've already started to cut. This little burr right here that I talked about earlier, don't even worry about it. You see that? It might be a problem if it gets real deep, but most of the time you can work this problem out with sandpaper, so it's not an issue. All right. I made somebody nervous right there. Anyways, so we're going to take out this gouge, and we're going to take it, we're going to stick it in the end on that circle. And again, if you'll notice, this is not perfectly in the center. And some people would say, oh, God, that's terrible. It's not going to be all right, because most of this material that's on the inside, you have to remember, it's going to be gone. It's not going to be there anymore. So as long as you get near close enough to center, you'll be all right. Let's go ahead and take this burr off real quick, which is real simple process. Let's just get the hanging part off. That's really what you want to do. You just want to get the little hanging little tidbits off. Take this, stick it in this hole where I've made this cut, relatively center, and then we just rotate. And I'm not putting hardly any pressure with this hand. This hand, no pressure. I'm just letting the blade do 90% of the work. And I sit here, and I do this for an eternity. Usually I'm watching something on my phone, find something to get into. I'm sure we all have our own thing. We may be sitting out watching the birds fly by. But patience. Rings are patience. It's one of the reasons that I like them. They teach you patience. They teach you how to handle something that is much weaker than you, and with care. All right, so as you'll notice, we've made that hole deeper. But now there's a problem. There's a plug in the center. And we've got to get this little piece out of there so that we can start carving the hole out to make the ring. So we carve this out by coming in slightly at an angle and rotating around. Because as we rotate around, when we rotate around, we're actually cutting that plug out because we've got it at an angle going into the plug. You see what I'm saying? So we take this and we slowly cut it out, right? Keep cutting and keep cutting. And so you say, oh, well, how do you know when you've gone deep enough? How do you know when you've gotten deep enough into the wood that you're going to be able to successfully cut this off right here somewhere and make a ring? Well, that's what this is for. You stick this in, and you take your finger and place it flat against the wood and pull it out. And then you take your finger and rotate it upside down, and you put it on there. Now you see it's in this far. That's how big that ring would be. I don't think that's deep enough, so we're going to keep going. Also, the smaller this way that your ring is, the more fragile it becomes. So when you first start, you may want to make a wider ring like this. I mean, as you can see, this ring is that big. I didn't make them all that big. I mean, some of them, as you can tell, very small. I made them much smaller. Takes practice, takes time, a little bit of luck. I think a lot of this ring making really comes down to a lot of luck and what you end up in the piece of wood that you get and how patient you are with it and sometimes the mood that you're in. If you're a little upset, you may be pushing a little harder than you need to be and breaking your wood. So, be careful. Remember, this is a relaxing experience. We're just going to hang out. I'm going to take this. We're going to do this. Spin it, spin it, spin it. Look around, see what's going on. See what's going on over there. Nothing going on. Just keep going. And you just keep doing this. And I mean, this part, I think we all know. This is the part of whittling that we're all here for. This is the part that, whether we know it or not, we're all hanging out because we like to just sit and cut. I mean, that's really what it boils down to. So, you just keep doing this, and it really doesn't take long. About 4 or 5 minutes. Your arms will get tired. You may have to take a break, change your positioning a little bit, try and get a different angle on this thing. And so you say, oh, well, we couldn't have made that much progress. That right there is how much progress we made. And so we could take our thumb upside down and see where the blade ends is where the bottom stops at. So if we wanted to make a ring that was that big, where my finger is, this finger right here, If we wanted to make a blade that was that big, all we'd have to do now is just cut it off. And there's two ways to go about cutting it off. I'm going to make this one a little deeper because I want to guarantee that I get a good ring to show you guys how I go about making this process work and how I make this process happen. Again, it's a lot of patience. It's a lot of time. Don't force anything. Be gentle. Understand that you're whittling. Old guys used to whittle back in the day, and they'd sit on the porch for 6 hours and make a chain out of an old broomstick. This sort of thing is a very patient thing, and if you're rushing it, you're gonna mess yourself up. You may get away with it on occasion. I've done it. I had to look. I thought I saw a crack. No crack. You may get away with it on occasion. I've been known to come out here and sit down and only have 15, 20 minutes, but I want to make something and I don't, you know what I mean? And I'll burn through one. And in the process, a lot of times what ends up happening is, unfortunately, I break a ring. And there comes thereafter the heartbreak and the pain and the suffering. So we keep doing this till we get it as deep as we want. On this particular blade, if you could tell, there's a dip right here. I usually just use that as a measuring tool. When this part sinks into the wood, I know I'm deep enough to make a good ring. That whatever happens, that's going to be a relatively good sized ring, and it's probably not going to break. As long as you don't put too much pressure on it. Again, rings are fragile things, especially wooden ones. You are taking out 90% of the supporting material. And despite, what we've all learned in school, that triangles and circles are incredibly strong, and believe me, that's strong. That's also hardened. It's also been sitting there in that box for a month or so. That's one that I actually made for my daughter. She wanted me to put a design on it. She didn't want the basics thing, so I gave her a little bit of stripe pattern going. Kind of did my own thing. I'm not very good at fine engraving. I wish I was better, but again, that's why I'm here. My goodness. Ooh, allergies. Anyways, we keep going. We keep digging and digging and digging until we get down to the point that we want to be at. Do a little bit of an angle, get some of that wood out of there, blow it out, get it clean. And now, as you can tell, that's actually relatively hollow. There's a little bit of wood in there that you might can see. It's like a little tiny spike of wood. It's just actually some fibers. And you could actually sit here and work that out if you wanted to. But once you have it deep enough, it's no need to. Because we're that deep now, which means we're making a ring that big. And I'm going to get my pencil because measure twice, cut once. Isn't that the old adage? Measure twice, cut once. We make it just a small mark, just to kind of give us an idea. It doesn't even have to be straight. It doesn't have to be any of that. Because again, when you're shaping this thing, 90% of the shaping, really, I guess that's a bit generous. I'd say about 80% of the shaping, from this thing comes from the actual sandpaper. You take out a lot of the excess material that you're not going to use really quickly with a knife. But outside of that, that's it. Once you're down to here, you're at the easy part. You can now, at this point, if you want to do this the traditional whittling way, you're going to take out your knife, and you're going to make a cut. First, you're going to make your stop cut, and you're going to push down into it. Make sure that you get everything lined. Oh, it's so windy. Give me a second, guys. Oh, all right. All right, I'm back. So, now that the wind's out of my face, the hair's out of my face from the wind, you make your stop cut. And you always want to be careful because you want to make the wrong cut. Then you want to take your other side and cut down in. Now, here's the trick to this. because you can mess up your ring if you cut the wrong way. Now, when we cut this, we want to cut up. If we cut down, we're cutting material off of the ring. So always cut up, like this. You want to cut up into it. And obviously not at this angle and not holding it like this. I mean, as you see, I hold it out in front of me, straight out in front of me where you can see the hole, and then I make my cut. And now you can do this, and do this, just continue to make your cut all the way around, and just keep making it until you get it down enough that you feel safe in cutting it off and just calling it there. Now, that sort of thing is dangerous when you say, oh, I'm just going to call it here, and I'm just going to try and cut through this thing. I've lost a couple of rings that way, and it's not any fun. So, I'm sure someone in the community gonna give me some trouble about this. This is, I believe, a limb saw. It's not made for this, but this was a limb, so we're gonna count it as a limb. You take a limb saw and you cut off the blank. Once this blank is off, you have a perfectly round circle. Once you have this circle, all you've got to do is hollow out the center with your knife, and I'll show you how to do that real quick. You take your knife, and you want to stick it inside. And you want to be watching as you're doing it. You want to see, like, there's more material up here than there actually is down here. So when you're taking out material initially, you want to try and even that up. You want to try and make it a circle, or as close to a circle as possible. So how you're going to do that is you're just going to continue taking off material very carefully. This is where a sharp blade comes in handy. Because if you have a dull blade and the way that you're cutting this, and I'm sure someone's going to tell me this is not that I'm hurting the wood or something. I don't really know. This is just the way that it works for me. And it's the way that I consistently, time and time again, make rings. So you're going to take this and you're going to cut it like this. And as you can see, you get these little flakes in there. And you just take your knife, give it a little wiggle. Close your eyes when you don't want to blow any dust back in your eyes. I'm sure somebody will get on to me for not wearing safety goggles, but where I come from, safety is not number one. Fun is. So, and I'm not a very safe person. So, meh. Now, you take it and you just gently work that out of there. Now, to get the pulp out of there, I guess that's what you'd call it, because it really looks, kind of resembles pulp. But you take that and you keep doing that till you get it down to enough where you can actually stick a piece of sandpaper in there. Because at that point, you'll be picking up the knife on and off. Most of the time, you'll be taking a piece of sandpaper about that big. As you can see, this is about as big as my thumb. A little bit smaller, actually, about as big as my index finger. And really, that's all you're going to need, because you got to remember, it's going on a finger. You don't need much more than that. And getting a big old piece of sandpaper and trying to fit it in that little tiny hole, it's not going to work. You're going to end up with more pain than you do have fun in making this thing. So you just spin it. Just stick it in there. You just spin it until you get it smooth enough and you get it shaped right. And you got to pay attention to, like I say, you always want to be watching the material on the outside. You always want to make sure that you have the right amount of material on all sides. And I usually just eyeball this. And sometimes you end up with a slight imperfection in a ring that, to be honest, only you are going to see, and the person who has it, and they'll only see it a year after it's done. Like, they'll have it for a year, and they'll be looking at it and go, that's kind of lopsided. You and them are the only two people that they're going to notice. And by the time they notice it's going to be so far away, they're not going to care. They'll be glad that they have what they have. Again, I strive for as close to perfection as I can, but again, I'm very restrictive on my abilities. I don't like to use power tools. I don't like to use those sorts of things. So for those of you who are asking how I make a ring without breaking it, there's your answer. It's that simple. That's all I do. And like I said, it's a naturally sourced piece of wood. I don't buy blanks and stuff. I've seen people do the bent rings, which is it's phenomenal to watch somebody do that. But I don't have the time, and I really don't have the patience for it. And I know I say I don't have the patience, but I'm a whittler. kind of ridiculous. But when I'm whittling, I can truly see the results instantaneously. Every move that I make is translated into making this ring look exactly how I want it to look. And it's one of the things I like about whittling is it's 100% control. And I guess in some ways that makes me seem like a bit of an egotist, but at the same time, that's the beauty of this. It's art with 100% control. There is no paint by numbers. There is no cut and design. There is no every single time it's going to come out exactly the same. Because when you're whittling, every piece of wood is different. You're not picking up a board that's pre-cut every time. And so you have to keep that in mind when you're making these rings. It is difficult. You may fail, but that's okay. Because every failure is a learning point. And you may fail so bad that you have to put the ring down, put your knife in a box, and walk away for a week and come back. But as long as you come back, you're learning something. Or you're at least willing to accept that that failure was not the end. And so, yeah, whittlers of Reddit, that's how I make my rings. It's pretty simple. I don't, again, like I say, I sit out here on my front porch, and I enjoy a nice day, hang out, watch the goats walk around out there. We have a bunch of goats. I watch them walk around, and I cut on wood. It's very relaxing for a lot of people, and I get why people do it. And I'm very happy to be a part of this community, and I hope that you guys can teach me something, and I hope that I taught you something. So you guys have a good evening.